Hello and welcome back to the next One Piece review and discussion. We are here with the continuation of Brook's second backstory, and it is a short chapter this time around, but it sure does cover a lot of what Brook went through in his early years. So, without further ado, chapter 1184. Only Bones Get Left Behind. A very apt title to do with Brook. So, our cover story request is indeed a Brook one, and it is Brook with his thumb up, drinking a cup of tea while being electrocuted by a bunch of jellyfish. So, it is a great cover story to do with Brook's character. But nevertheless, we have some backstory to cover. So, last we had left off on Elbaf, we had Eam and Loki and Ragnar having a huge scale battle between the three of them. Absolute carnage and chaos. And Eam was just beginning to sort of identify, the Nidhogger dragon fruit that Loki was wielding. And he'd finally come round to saying that he knew it was Ragnar who had this mythical squirrel fruit, and that he recognised Ragnar from a long time ago, and that he realised Ragnar had been waiting this whole time for not only someone worthy enough or strong enough, but someone who could enact vengeance specifically against Eam. Someone who is by far able to take on a adversary foe of this sort of scale. And in their battle that commenced and all the attacks that were thrown out, he referenced that him and Straw Hat Luffy will go the same way as Dozen, a character who probably during the Void Century was a traitor or someone who was fighting against Eam at the time. So, a bit of more connection is being set up. But nevertheless, we had Sanji sort of standing ground or heading over to where the rain god Zaza was currently capturing children. It had captured 7 of the kids, and even though the parents were completely ruined, they were all bandaged up, like Chopper and a few others that helped them out, they were still ready to act and put their life on the line. And Ripley herself was saying, my life means nothing if not for my child. I will gladly lay down to make sure Colin is safe. So crazy scenes from the Elbaf giants here, but ready to fight against a rain god. And we didn't see much else that side because the remainder of the chapter was focused on Brook. So on the way back across to where Brook and the other Straw Hats were, we saw that Gunko was actually still alive. A few chapters now where there was reference of Gunko just was dead or no one had seen her. And Eam had sent an omen blast at the block of ice that Ragnar had caused. And we heard Loki say, nothing can break this ice unless Ragnar chooses to. And I thought, well, obviously that makes sense. It's a pretty strong attack, but Eam, of all people, the person that sits at the top of this world, would be able to just annihilate it with these omen flames we've been seeing. But no, even an omen flame can't destroy the ice. So Gunko is still preserved, still alive, and Frankie confirms this when he rushes back to the group. He's like, that woman is all still in ice. What are we doing then? And it was kind of a round of questions from everyone, why were you acting so hastily, Brook? Who is this woman to you? What connection? And he was like, it's not possible, but she would be if it's the person I'm thinking of. 77 years old now. But it's crazy, everything about her is screaming at me. My instinct is telling me that is her. But I just don't realise, how possible it could be. It surely is the same woman. But he's racking his brain, and it's like a real internal struggle while everyone's posing these questions to him. And he talks about, this kingdom long ago, the Asparia kingdom, and he says that there was once a man like who saved me, and it was his daughter who I was so close to, who he was referring to, and she was one of three personalities in that body. Surely that was the one who freed us from the bindings initially. So the three personality setup comes back, but he's talking about this conflict. Like, surely then it's not just her in there. Like, she's being controlled, maybe. And he talks about he didn't think that was possible, but now he's seen the demonification of giants, and now that's definitely a thing. So, all in all, it ends on Jinbei saying, right, Brook, we aren't leaving here until you make a decision. Are we saving her or are we killing her? Like, she still came here to attack Elbath, to start this war or whatever. Like, which way are we going? So in that time when then Brook's beginning to explain his sort of real conflict, we go back to the Asparia kingdom where Brook is a young man jumping round the streets singing gallantly, and he is a high up captain of the like guard corps here in Asparia. And it turns out that not only is he still very proficient with his sword, but Shuri, who's very young, is very inspired by him, loves Brook, loves his music, and he is actually very close to the current king, Reuven. Now, he is so close, we find out this chapter, and why, but in this plot that unfolds, the Queen Candela, who Brook is equally obsessed with, she was being targeted by the Moron family, and a sort of horse-drawn like cavalry were starting to raid the opera house and had flanked around, put up a guard position, and were ready to capture Candela for Moron himself, like this gangster sort of family. And while the king is in a panic, Brook says, well, that's so strange because, I met those guys just this morning. I've actually already cut them down. And we go back and they're all just on the floor, like they've all been sliced. Brook's attack had then triggered. So it was absolutely nuts to see the strength that Brook was at just 20 years old here. But we pick up this chapter. 7 years have now passed. Shuri is 14 years of age, and the rumours have started. There are a bunch of princes, like suitors, who have come to ask her hand in marriage, but none of them are capable of standing against her blade. She is fierce, just like her mother, just like probably Brook, who has been training her since she was 7. She doesn't like a weak man. She wants someone who is strong, and she also wants someone who can play music. And all the princes are like, that's a pretty weird stipulation, but we can't argue why you've got a sword at our throat. But we jump over and we see she's walking with Brook, who's now 27. He is now the commander. He has leveled up to the highest rank of the corps here. And he's talking like, you really gave those suitors a thrashing. And she is just still as infatuated with Brook, talking about how she's grown stronger, cuter, talking about all this. And Brook still doesn't pay any attention to her. So much so that he's like talking about how she talks about her body, like isn't very ladylike. And he immediately jumps over to a mature woman to his left and goes into the classic, this woman's so beautiful, may I see your panties, classic Brook-esque character. And she just throws a sword at his head. But we see he goes back into song. These two seem to be very, very close together. That sort of master student level of sort of friendship now, where their bond is very strong. And they're singing away, and Brook's song references that of the dead, you will find only bones get left behind. And like, Obviously, the very huge point is that Brook is now a skeleton. He is now bones. Has he been left behind? But it's that sort of idea of, it's just in a song at the moment, and this is the connection. But we see Shuri is a big fan of the song, obviously, and says, you really admire, like, my father and mother, don't you? You really look up to them. And he explains that, well, they are my benefactor. They are the people who, saved me. If it wasn't for the fact that I crossed paths with your father all those years ago, I'd only be bones that got left behind. And we have a flashback within a flashback. So Brook, at now 11 years old, young boy, looking through the window or bars here into this pristine, very high level primary school. They're learning instruments, they're learning music. Asparia thrives on that. And then Brook has been shooed away by a guard or someone nearby because he's just some street rat who keeps peeping through the bars, and he's making other people nervous. So we go over, and Brook is actually living in a junkyard with stray dogs and all this heaps of mess. And he has built himself a violin out of glass bottles and strings and stuff that he's found. And he's singing away terribly. The lyrics are all over the place, but he's so young and he's so earnest about music. He's putting his heart and soul into it. And a young man just happens to stumble into the junkyard at this stage. And it is a very young Reuven. Now, he doesn't look young. He looks very old, in fact. But he even says to Brook here that he's actually 21 years old. So he's 10 years older than Brook currently is. And he's like, the lyrics are rotten there, but did you actually write this? And he explains about, this is who he wants to be, this is his violin, the glass bottles and the wires. And he says it sounds great, doesn't know what he's on about. It's more of a vibe, it's just so freeing. And he's like, I've never had anyone around, and he questions this man being a fan. And he's like, oh, you know what? Actually, yeah. And he starts singing along or laughing away with Brook here. So Brook says, right, I'm going to call you Big Bro, and I'm going to cook you a meal of frogs and grasshoppers. So in that sort of afternoon when they're eating away and laughing and talking about, Brook says he's actually managed to steal some curry powder from a nearby marine ship. That really adds the flavour. While Reuven is looking at this, he goes into this sort of moment where he thinks about, the royal meals he's receiving, all these fancy, decorated, deconstructed meals that just don't please him. And then, these really high up level individuals are, bringing these women, these highly prestigious, a lady from the Saffron conglomerate who'd been a valedictorian at the Enoch Academy. Absolutely just of no concern to him. And it's in this moment that he starts to choke on a frog. And he's just so overwhelmed, he's convulsing. And Brook is even I didn't know my food was so good. I didn't think it'd be, this enjoyable. You don't have to pay me, But now we can sing for the afternoon, and we can just enjoy ourselves because we're both going through hard times. And we see flashes over the years, clearly, or over this time, of Brook and Reuven having wonderful time in the junkyard together, enjoying the music. And one fateful day, we see back at that port, back on the marine ship, they're loading instruments, they're handling them, and Brook is tied to a chair, bloody, this young lad. And it is absolutely crazy that this poor Brook is going through this at such a young age, but the Marines think he is smuggling bombs or powder onto the ship, and that he is an informant or has a connection to the Moran family. And they found from an informant, they paid good money for this. He's the one lying here. Like, we knew he was coming. It's not just about curry powder. And Brook starts to sing again. He's thinking of, only the bones that'll get left behind. And he says to himself, he's like, it may only be right now in these split seconds, but as long as I keep singing, dying actually doesn't seem. And he trails off, and he's like, you know what, then it'll be over soon. And he starts to say goodbye to like the dogs, to Reuven, his big bro. And these Marines are like, we've got to kind of deal with this punk now. Like, he's seen our faces, like, let's just gut him down. And almost all of a sudden, Brook finally screams out that final lyric, you'll only find the bones that get left behind. And at the same time, Reuven barges in, like, door explodes, and he is furious, coming to save Brook. And they all turn and shout, Prince Reuven. And Brook's like, whoa, he's a prince. And he launches himself at Brook, and he's like beside himself that he's finally found him. Like, he's okay, he's safe. All of the court guards come in. We see Candela as well by his side at this stage, who is also blade in hand. And he is beside himself now. He is like, how dare these people treat Brook this way? They've already dealt with the Moran family. They've dealt with the person who was the informant. And the Marines are like, oh, shit. Okay, so we were just wrong then. And he is like, I am not going to work under a government who would treat someone like this. Like, our world is doomed otherwise. And he speaks to Candela at this stage, and she is like, I'm merely just like a blade for you. Like, I will always fight by your side. And they tear these Marines apart for how they've treated Brook, and he is just beside himself. And Brook is just going, wow, he's a swordsman. Like, it's really cool. So they save Brook, they rescue whatever was going on here, and we go back to the palace. Brook now recovers, all bandaged up, and we see Candela and Reuven are within the room. They're talking about, they're so glad Brook's safe. He's here now. This is where he needs to be. He's obviously shocked that Reuven is a prince, and he's like, look, I didn't want to tell you, but it wasn't that I meant to deceive you. It was more just I enjoyed spending so much time with you. I didn't think it mattered for you to know or not. And it is sort of Candela who's like, it really is something we need to consider going forward as your royal standing. We can't have you gallivanting around like this, like just disappearing. Like, all those times you went missing, it scared people half to death. And then we see Candela just being like, oh, but you were meeting such a cute little friend here. So Brook nose starts to explode, and she's like, oh gosh, I didn't realise his wounds were so deep. But this is obviously the start of Brook being so enamoured by Candela here with that compliment. But Reuven declares that, you know what, tell everyone that this kid is now my favourite musician. He gets a room in the barracks. He is allowed to perform music, to give him a proper violin, give him musical instruments, and arrange for him to attend school. A new star has been born here in Esparia with his backing, and he's like, I love this kid more than most things. Okay, so from now on, this palace has just got a lot more fun. And it is this act of generosity that Brook never forgets. So Brook like falls back onto the pillow, like he's obviously exhausted, and just begins to cry. Like, he's overwhelmed by what Reuven has given him here, this opportunity. And that's where we end it. So it's a short and sweet chapter just to really emphasise Brook's connection and how deeply he cares about the king and queen here. Because I think the next chapter, so we've got a break next week, but the following chapter is going to be what goes down between the kingdom falling apart, what happens with Reuven and Candela, and why he can't look at Shuri or didn't want to think about Shuri anymore, and why she went off to the Holy Land like Brook had told us. But I think, short and simple, it wasn't overly complicated, but it's just more heartbreaking backstory for Brook. Like, the dude's been through enough. Like, do you know what I mean? Give him a break. But I enjoyed that chapter. Let me know what you thought, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.